In the early 1940s, when the world's oceans had become vast battlefields and the night sky glowed faintly from distant fires, there was a silence that only sailors could understand. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made you listen for something, anything, that might come out of the darkness. On one such night, far out in the churning black waters of the North Atlantic, a single British frigate cut through the waves. Her name was HMS Valiant, a ship that would soon write her name into naval history in letters of fire and salt. The HMS Valiant was not a mighty battleship with towers of guns or thick armor plating. She was a lean vessel, nimble, underpowered by comparison to the great capital ships that dominated the headlines, but held together by something far stronger than steel. The men aboard her were seasoned, driven by duty, and held by a shared understanding that their small ship stood as one of the last shields protecting Britain's lifelines across the Atlantic. Merchant convoys carrying vital supplies, food, fuel, ammunition, threaded through the deadly hunting grounds of enemy submarines and surface raiders. Every ship mattered, every night mattered. And this one was about to matter more than any before. The year was 1943. The tide of the war was shifting, but the outcome remained uncertain. The German U-boats prowled the depths like wolves, while surface raiders and disguised freighters lurked among neutral lanes. The Mediterranean was burning, the Atlantic choking with wrecks, and the British Navy stretched to its thinnest line. London demanded results, yet resources were few. The Admiralty relied on courage, ingenuity, and men like those aboard the Valiant to keep the fragile arteries of the Empire open. That night began like so many others. The sea was calm, the horizon invisible beneath a low mist, and the stars faint behind a drifting cloud bank. The engines hummed a steady rhythm. Inside the cramped bridge, Captain Edward Halcroft, a man of quiet authority and sharp instinct, studied the horizon through binoculars. He had been at sea since before the war began, and the years had carved the mark of command into his face. His crew trusted him completely. He had a reputation for daring, tempered by discipline, and he believed that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The Valiant's crew went about their routines with mechanical precision. Below deck, the engineers monitored the heartbeat of the ship, her boilers, pumps, and generators. On deck, gunners cleaned and reloaded their weapons. In the radio room, a faint crackle carried coded messages and static bursts. Everything seemed ordinary, but beneath that calm, a strange tension simmered. Rumors had been circulating for days, whispers of an enemy task group operating beyond the convoy lanes. 5 ships, possibly destroyers, or armed supply cruisers, sweeping the ocean for Allied vessels. No one knew where they were, only that they were out there. The Valiant was alone. She had been detached from her convoy escort group to investigate a suspected contact, a risky assignment that left her without support. But Captain Halcroft accepted the order without hesitation. His mission was simple on paper: patrol a designated sector and report any sightings. Yet war rarely followed its paperwork. By 2300 hours, the wind had shifted. The temperature dropped, and the sea turned restless. In the radio room, Lieutenant Graves, the communications officer, listened intently to the faint rhythm of coded transmissions. Something did not sound right. The frequencies were unfamiliar, the cadence irregular. He adjusted the dials, filtering through static until he caught a short burst that froze him in place. It was not in English, nor was it from any Allied call sign. He scribbled notes and hurried to the bridge. "Captain, sir. Possible enemy chatter, bearing northeast, perhaps 30 miles. Captain Halcroft took the paper, scanning it briefly before turning toward the radar operator. "Any echoes on the screen?" The radar set was primitive by modern standards, its green glow revealing more noise than clarity. Yet the operator hesitated. "There is something, sir," Could be weather interference. Could be vessels. Halcroft nodded. Maintain course. Reduce speed. Sound general quarters quietly. Within minutes, the ship transformed. The calm routine gave way to silent readiness. Men moved like shadows along the deck, loading shells into the guns, checking torpedo tubes, sealing hatches. No one spoke louder than a whisper. They all knew the odds. A single frigate, outnumbered and far from help, could not hope to survive a direct confrontation with a full enemy squadron. But they also knew their captain's mind. He would not turn away from the hunt. The sea grew darker as the night deepened. Somewhere beyond the horizon, 5 enemy ships, perhaps destroyers, perhaps escorts, moved unseen. The Valiant drifted toward them like a predator stalking something much larger than itself. Captain Halcroft stood at the helm, his voice calm. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "tonight may test the limits of what one ship can do. But remember, the sea is not ruled by numbers. It is ruled by those who dare." The crew held their silence. They could feel the weight of the coming storm pressing down on them. The Atlantic had swallowed countless ships, but there was something electric in the air that night, a sense that history itself was holding its breath. Far away, enemy lookouts scanned the same darkness, unaware that a single British frigate was closing in. Their orders were simple: find and destroy any Allied vessel in the sector. They believed themselves the hunters. They did not know that within hours they would become the hunted. The Valiant moved forward at half speed, her bow cutting a narrow path through black water. The moon broke briefly through the clouds, casting silver light across the deck. The men glanced upward, silent prayers on their lips. War had taught them that luck was as vital as bravery. The faint sound of waves slapping against metal echoed across the deck. Then the radar operator's voice came again, sharper this time. "Multiple contacts, sir. 5. No, 6. Bearing 075. Range 20 miles and closing." The captain's jaw tightened. "Signal room, maintain radio silence. Engineering, prepare for full speed on my mark. Weapons, stand ready." The enemy was near. The ocean, vast and indifferent, seemed to shrink around them. Every man aboard the Valiant understood that by dawn, they would either be dead or immortalized. As the clock struck midnight, Captain Halcroft turned toward his helmsman. "Helm, steady as she goes. We will hold course until we see them." The helmsman nodded. "Aye, sir." Outside, the sea remained deceptively calm, but beneath that calm, fate was stirring. The British frigate, HMS Valiant, modest in size but monumental in spirit, was sailing straight into legend. And so began the night that would be remembered as the Battle of 5-1, the night when courage and cunning would collide with steel and fire upon the endless sea. Around midnight, the night sky thickened with mist, and the stars disappeared behind a veil of gray. The Atlantic swelled with slow, heavy waves that slapped against the hull of the HMS Valiant like the steady beat of a war drum. Inside the ship, the dim red lights of the radar room flickered, casting long shadows over the tense faces of the crew. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and ozone, the scent of men who knew they were edging closer to danger. Lieutenant Graves hunched over his equipment, his fingers steady as they danced across the dials. The radar screen pulsed softly in front of him. Each green sweep carved a slow circle, leaving behind faint traces of static. Then, without warning, 5 small blips appeared. Weak at first, then sharper, clearer, more deliberate. He leaned forward, whispering, "Captain, contacts confirmed. 5 vessels. Bearing 075, speed steady, range 16 miles. Captain Edward Halcroft moved to his side, his eyes narrowing as he studied the glowing marks. "Formation pattern?" he asked. "They are moving in a line-ahead formation, sir. Looks like a patrol line. destroyers or armed escorts. The captain's lips pressed into a thin line. That confirms the intercept reports. We have found our enemy. Around them, the officers stood motionless, waiting for the next command. The tension in the room was a living thing. The ship's engines throbbed below, low and rhythmic, as if sensing what was to come. Halcroft spoke calmly. "Very well. We will shadow them for as long as we can without being detected. No lights, no radio transmissions. Maintain full silence. Let us see what we are dealing with." The order rippled through the ship. Lights were extinguished, voices fell to whispers, and the crew worked by touch and instinct. On the bridge, the helmsman guided the frigate by compass and the faint shimmer of phosphorescence along the water's edge. In the sonar room, another officer, Sub-Lieutenant Morris, listened intently through his headset. The rhythmic ping of the sonar pulse echoed faintly through the metal walls. Each return sound told a story: the distance, the depth, the character of what lay ahead. "5 contacts confirmed," he murmured. "Different acoustic signatures, 2 sound heavier, possibly destroyers. The others could be escort corvettes." The captain nodded. "They are running convoy defense pattern. They do not expect us to attack." For a moment, no one spoke. The Valiant was smaller, lighter, and far less armed than any of those vessels. Yet she carried one advantage: surprise. The first plan was not to fight. It was to see, to gather intelligence, identify the enemy, and report back. But as the minutes ticked by, Halcroft's instincts began to whisper otherwise. The enemy formation was heading toward a critical Allied supply route. If they broke through, they could cripple an entire convoy before morning. There was no time to wait for reinforcements. At 0100 hours, the radar screen flickered again. One of the enemy ships had changed course, moving slightly ahead of the group. It was likely a scout or lead destroyer. Graves frowned. "They are altering formation, sir. It could be a search maneuver." Halcroft straightened. "If they are searching, we will soon be the ones found. We attack now, before they can signal our presence." The bridge fell silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to pause. Then the captain continued, his voice steady but electric with resolve. "Prepare torpedoes 1 through 4. Set depth for shallow run detonation. Gun crews to stations. Helm, bring us to intercept course, bearing 078. Lieutenant Graves hesitated. "Sir, 5 ships? We cannot—" The captain cut him off gently. "We can, and we will. The enemy believes size determines strength. Let us remind them that intelligence and will can outfight steel." Outside, the frigate adjusted her course, slicing across the waves in darkness. The sea sprayed against the bow, and the wind began to rise. The radar operator adjusted his focus, tracking each contact as it drew nearer. The sonar room filled with the steady rhythm of pings, faster now, sharper, echoing like a heartbeat through the hull. In the torpedo room, sailors worked with hushed urgency. Each torpedo was checked, armed, and slid into position. They whispered small prayers, not out of fear but out of respect for the ocean's impartial nature. The Valiant had become a living organism, every man a vital cell in its body. On the bridge, Captain Halcroft stood motionless, his binoculars trained on the horizon. Then, through the mist, faint shapes began to emerge, dark silhouettes moving across the water, their running lights barely visible. 5 ships indeed. Their outlines confirmed it. 2 destroyers, 3 smaller escorts, all flying enemy colors. "Range, 6 miles, the radar officer reported quietly. "Hold fire," said the captain. "Let them come closer. We will strike when they believe themselves safe." Minutes stretched into eternity. The sea hissed against the hull. The crew held their breath. Then, At 01:27 hours, Halcroft spoke. Target the lead ship. Torpedoes 1 and 2, fire on my mark. Stand by. A long pause, then fire. A muffled thud echoed through the deck as the first torpedo left its tube, followed by another. The men could almost feel them gliding through the black water, silent and unseen. The Valiant turned slightly to starboard, concealing her wake. In the distance, the radar picked up a sudden shift, one of the enemy ships changing speed. They had no idea yet what was coming. 20 seconds passed, then 30. Then the sea erupted. A flash of orange fire split the night as the lead enemy ship shuddered under the impact. The explosion rolled across the waves, lighting the sky for an instant before darkness reclaimed it. The radar officer shouted, "Direct hit! Target 1 disabled!" "Reload!" the captain ordered. "Prepare to fire on the second ship." The enemy squadron broke formation, confusion spreading among them. Searchlights flickered on, slicing through the fog. Gunfire cracked across the water, wild and searching. The Valiant's crew braced for the response. Captain Halcroft's voice cut through the chaos. "They will search toward where we fired. Helm, full turn to port. Bring us behind their line." The helmsman obeyed, swinging the ship in a tight arc. The Valiant's smaller frame and responsive engines gave her an agility the enemy lacked. Within moments, she was repositioned, hidden once again by darkness and smoke. In the sonar room, Morris listened. "They are scattering, sir. 1 sinking, 2 turning north, 1 heading west. The 5th remains stationary." The captain smiled grimly. "Then we divide them. This is no longer reconnaissance. This is a hunt." Every man aboard the Valiant felt the shift. Fear had turned to focus, tension to determination. They were no longer the prey. They had struck first, and that strike had drawn blood. As the enemy's radio signals burst into a frenzy, Lieutenant Graves intercepted fragments. The enemy commanders were confused, shouting orders, contradicting one another. One voice demanded to know the attacker's identity. Another called for air support that would never arrive in time. Captain Halcroft turned to his officers. "Gentlemen, we have the night. We have their fear, and we have a chance no one would believe possible. Prepare all batteries, ready the next torpedo spread. Let us show them what a single British frigate can do." The men moved with purpose, their hands sure and their minds clear. Outside, the sea boiled with the light of burning oil and shattered steel. The HMS Valiant slipped through the darkness once more, closing in for another strike, unseen and unstoppable. The battle that would echo through history was no longer a rumor waiting to unfold. It had begun. By 01:35 hours, the Black Atlantic had become a shifting arena of flame and smoke. What had begun as a silent intercept had transformed into a running battle that defied every expectation of naval warfare. The British frigate HMS Valiant, 1 ship alone, was now locked in combat against 5 enemy warships, and she was winning. The sea heaved with burning wreckage from the first strike. The lead enemy destroyer, once proud and sleek, now lay broken, its bow disappearing beneath waves as men scrambled desperately on deck. The other 4 ships were fanning out, their searchlights sweeping across the dark water like angry eyes searching for vengeance. Inside the Valiant, the air was thick with tension and the sharp scent of gunpowder. Orders echoed through the narrow corridors as the crew worked in near darkness. The gun crews loaded their 5-inch shells with mechanical rhythm. The torpedo teams prepared the next spread. Every man moved with the coordination of instinct, every heartbeat synchronized to the rhythm of war. "Bearing 220, enemy ship closing fast," shouted Lieutenant Graves, his voice tight with adrenaline. Captain Edward Halcroft leaned forward, peering through his binoculars. The faint silhouette of a destroyer surged through the mist, its searchlight stabbing across the sea. "Range?" he asked. 3,000 yards and closing." "Very well. Guns 1 and 2. Fire when ready." The night split apart. The Valiant's main guns thundered, recoiling with a roar that vibrated through her deck. 2 shells streaked into the darkness. A moment later, a burst of light bloomed across the water as one found its mark. The enemy destroyer's bow erupted in flames, and its searchlights went dark. "Direct hit amidships," the gunner shouted. Cheers rose briefly from the crew before the captain's voice steadied them again. "No celebration yet. The rest are still coming." Another flash of light tore through the fog. Enemy return fire. The shells screamed past the Valiant, throwing plumes of seawater skyward. One shell struck close enough to rattle her hull, sending shudders through the metal. "Minor damage on the aft deck," reported the engineer. "No casualties." "Maintain speed," Halcroft ordered. "We will not break formation. Helm, bring us around to starboard. Prepare smoke canisters." A hiss filled the air as the Valiant released a wall of thick smoke behind her. The gray veil spread quickly, concealing her movements from enemy radar and sight. Beneath that cover, she shifted course again, slipping between the separated enemy ships like a shadow. The radar operator spoke up. "Third contact approaching from the east, fast, likely a corvette." Halcroft nodded. "Perfect. They will assume we are fleeing west. Let us turn straight into them." The crew barely believed their ears. Turning toward an enemy instead of away was madness, but the captain's instincts had never failed them before. The Valiant swung hard to port, engines rumbling as she cut through her own smoke. The crew braced as the horizon lit up again, the corvette's guns flashing in the distance. Sparks rained down on the deck as stray rounds skipped across the water. "Range, 2,000 yards. Fire!" 2 more torpedoes raced out, streaking silently through the dark waves. 10 seconds passed, then a thunderous explosion tore through the night. The corvette's forward section lifted clear of the water before collapsing in a boiling inferno. The blast wave rocked the Valiant, but she held firm. "Target destroyed," Graves confirmed, his voice breaking slightly from disbelief. "That makes 3. Captain Halcroft's expression remained composed, though his eyes reflected the fire outside. "Then we continue," he said quietly. But now the remaining 2 ships had closed in. The sea around the Valiant erupted with tracer fire. Machine gun rounds hammered across her hull, sparking against the metal. The crew ducked low as shards of glass and splinters flew. "Damage report," Halcroft shouted. "Superficial on the starboard side, engine room holding steady, forward gun still operational." The captain gave a grim nod. "Good. Helm, reduce speed, drift 5 degrees south. Let them think we are crippled." He was setting a trap. As the enemy destroyers closed the gap, thinking they had cornered their prey, the Valiant slowed, her guns falling silent. The 2 ships turned their broadsides, preparing to unleash full salvos, but at that precise moment, Halcroft barked his next order. "Hard to starboard! Fire all guns!" The Valiant swung around in an instant, her bow cutting across the waves as every operational gun opened fire. The shells tore through the night, striking the nearer destroyer squarely across its bridge. Flames erupted through its superstructure. The second destroyer, blinded by the explosion, fired blindly into the smoke, straight into its wounded ally. The crew watched as one enemy ship turned on the other in confusion and chaos. Gunfire echoed across the sea as the pair of destroyers collided, one burning, the other crippled. The Valiant used the distraction to circle wide, lining up one last torpedo shot. "Fire number 6!" The final torpedo slid into the water and disappeared. The crew waited, seconds stretching like hours. Then, Another flash. An eruption of orange and black as the last destroyer's ammunition store detonated. The sound rolled across the ocean like thunder. The radar operator's voice trembled. All enemy contacts neutralized. Sir? All 5. The bridge fell silent. The only sounds were the distant crackle of fire and the rhythmic slap of waves against steel. The Valiant's men stared out into the smoky night, unable to speak. Halcroft finally broke the silence. Damage control teams to stations. Begin rescue operations. Any survivors, enemy or not, will be brought aboard. The crew moved immediately, lowering boats, hauling in the wounded from flaming wrecks. Even amid victory, they did not forget their humanity. The ocean did not care who won or lost, and neither did the sea's dead. By 0410 hours, the battle was over. The Atlantic had gone quiet again. The fires still burned in the distance, reflections flickering across the waves like the ghosts of ships that once lived. The Valiant floated at the center of it all, scarred, her paint scorched, her decks littered with shell casings, but still afloat, still alive. In the logbook, Lieutenant Graves wrote the official entry in neat, trembling handwriting. Engaged 5 enemy ships between 100 and 400 hours. All enemy vessels destroyed. HMS Valiant sustained minor damage. Casualties, 2 wounded, no dead. He paused before writing the final line, the words feeling too large for the page. Outcome, total victory. When dawn began to break, the horizon glowed gold and crimson over the Atlantic. Smoke rose from the ruins of 5 ships. The crew gathered quietly on deck, their faces pale but proud. The captain joined them, his coat stained with soot, his expression solemn. "We did not seek glory tonight," he said softly. "We sought survival. Yet history may call it something else." The men stood in silence as the rising sun turned the wreckage into silhouettes of legend. The HMS Valiant, one small frigate among giants, had done the impossible. When the first light of dawn spilled across the horizon, it revealed a sea transformed by the night's violence. The Atlantic stretched calm once more, its surface broken only by drifting debris and patches of oil shimmering like black glass beneath the morning sun. Smoke still curled from the remnants of 5 enemy ships that now lay beneath the waves. The HMS Valiant floated in their midst, her hull scarred, her decks burned in places, but still steady. An unlikely monument to courage and precision in the face of overwhelming odds. The men aboard the Valiant were exhausted. Their uniforms were soaked. Their hands blistered from hours at the guns, but their spirits carried a quiet fire. No one spoke of victory. No one needed to. The sea around them said it all. Captain Edward Halcroft stood on the bridge, binoculars in hand, scanning the smoldering remains. His officers waited for orders, but for the first time in hours he said nothing. He was listening to the hum of the engines, the creak of the deck, the soft crash of waves. The ocean had gone still again, as if acknowledging what had transpired. At last, he lowered the binoculars and spoke. "Signal the Admiralty. Use coded transmission. Enemy squadron neutralized. HMS Valiant remains operational. Request recovery and medical support." Lieutenant Graves, still pale from fatigue, nodded and relayed the message through the crackling radio set. The static hissed for a moment before the acknowledgement came back, short, official, yet unmistakably awed. "Message received, Valiant. Awaiting full report. Congratulations on your success." The word success felt too small. What had happened here was something else, something larger than the sum of the men and the ship. It was defiance, made manifest on open water. The surviving enemy sailors, those pulled from the sea during the early morning hours, sat wrapped in blankets near the stern, guarded but unharmed. Their faces were pale, shocked not only by defeat but by disbelief. One of them, an officer in a torn gray uniform, looked up at Halcroft as he passed. 5 ships, the man muttered in broken English, shaking his head. 1 ship did this? Halcroft paused, meeting his gaze. Not 1 ship, he replied quietly. 1 crew. By midday, Allied reconnaissance planes arrived overhead, circling the scene and photographing what remained of the battle. The reports that followed spread through naval channels faster than fire through dry timber. Admirals in London, Washington, and Halifax struggled to believe the numbers. A single British frigate engaging and sinking 5 enemy warships in one night defied every doctrine of naval warfare. Some called it luck. Others called it strategy. Those who had served at sea called it impossible. But it was true. When the Valiant finally limped into port 3 days later, her arrival drew hundreds to the docks. Dock workers stopped what they were doing. Naval officers stood in silence. The ship bore the scars of her ordeal. Holes patched with welded plates, soot-streaked sides, torn signal flags, but her crew stood at attention as they docked. The harbor erupted in applause as word spread, "The Valiant is back." Newspapers the next morning carried headlines that would echo across the world. 1 frigate against 5. The Valiant triumph. David slays Goliath at sea. Miracle in the Atlantic. In London, the Admiralty issued an official commendation. Captain Edward Halcroft received the Distinguished Service Order. Every officer and sailor aboard the HMS Valiant was decorated for valor. Yet when journalists asked Halcroft for a statement, his response was simple and solemn. "We did our duty," he said, "and the sea for one night favored the brave. But beyond medals and headlines, the battle's true legacy lay in what it taught the world." Naval strategists pored over the Valiant's engagement logs, studying every maneuver, every radar reading, every torpedo launch. They discovered that the frigate's success had not been a fluke. It had been the product of perfect synchronization between technology, training, and human instinct. The radar operators who had detected the enemy's formation hours before the first shot fired proved the growing importance of electronic warfare. The coordination between sonar and gunnery teams demonstrated how information could move faster than steel. The smoke screens, the deceptive maneuvers, and the fearless choice to turn toward danger rather than away, all of it rewrote the expectations of naval engagement. In the months that followed, British naval doctrine shifted. Smaller escort ships were trained for more aggressive tactics. Intelligence officers were embedded deeper within command structures. And the idea that a ship's power came not from her size, but from her crew, became a cornerstone of modern maritime warfare. For the men who lived it, though, the memory was simpler. They remembered the silence before the first torpedo fired, the deafening roar of the guns, and the eerie calm afterward. Some would later say that time itself seemed to stretch during those hours, that each minute felt like an eternity where courage and fear stood side by side. In letters home, sailors wrote not of glory, but of gratitude. One seaman, Arthur Blake, described it this way: "We thought we would die that night. When the first explosion lit up the sky, it was like watching the hand of fate turn in our favor. We did not fight for medals or names in papers. We fought because that was what the sea demanded of us." Captain Halcroft retired after the war, declining higher command and returning to the coast of Devon, where he lived quietly near the sea that had defined his life. He rarely spoke of the battle, though visitors often asked. On one such occasion, years later, a young journalist pressed him for details. The old captain smiled faintly and said, "The sea remembers enough for both of us." Today, in the Naval Museum at Portsmouth, a small exhibit stands in tribute to the HMS Valiant. Behind a pane of glass rests the ship's battered ensign, faded but intact. The accompanying plaque reads simply, "On a night in 1943, one British frigate faced 5 enemy warships and prevailed. The HMS Valiant and her crew demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and unity can turn the tide of any battle." Visitors often pause there longer than anywhere else. They imagine the dark Atlantic, the thunder of guns, the flash of fire against the waves. They imagine men who refuse to surrender to fear. The story of the HMS Valiant is not just a tale of war. It is a lesson in the power of human resolve, a reminder that when preparation meets courage, the impossible becomes possible. The sea, vast and merciless, does not favor the mighty. It favors those who dare. As the sun sets over the water outside the museum, the last rays of light touch that faded ensign. It seems to shimmer briefly, as if recalling the glow of that legendary night. And for those who know the story, one thought always returns. Of a single ship that changed the course of history under the quiet stars of the Atlantic.